Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for coming back from lunch. Hope we're all ready to listen to the next round of very interesting conversations. So I have the pleasure, my name is Erin Kepke, I work at the California Department of Education. I have the pleasure of introducing our next presenters. Today, the session is the Collective Instructional Leadership System. We have Julie Monet. She is the Associate Professor and Chair for the California State University of Chico. And then also Michael Kotar. He is the Professor, School of Education, California State University, Chico. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Michael.
Thank you for attending this session this afternoon. We're going to talk to you about the Collective Instructional Leadership System, which is an action research-based model for determining student needs, teachers-related professional learning needs, and then evaluating the effectiveness of interventions that teachers put in place based on the evidence that they have. So just a quick note to the sponsor. The project that we used to develop this was a 5-year project funded by the California Department of Education called the Teacher-Based Reform Initiative. And we really thank them for funding us for that amount of time. So here are our workshop topics. While you're looking at the slide, there's a packet in front of you, and the packet is arranged so that on the left side you've got a page to do some note taking on, and then on the right side you have a copy of our collective instructional leadership diagram. Underneath on the left side you'll have your first activities, and then later on the right side you'll have a set of activities. So we're going to have, I think, 3 or 4 interactive activities that you'll be doing as we go through the session. And it would be a real good idea to get to know the folks at your table, because you're going to be collaborating with the folks at your table in order to conduct the activities.
Okay, good. All right, so let's get started with thinking about when you took or experienced professional learning yourself. All right, and what I want you to think about is what made that professional learning experience effective or not so effective at meeting student needs, you bringing that work back into the classroom. So I want you to take about a minute and now talk with everybody that you know at your table and think about and share out your experience. How about if we start with someone at this table? You looked ready. Oh, right here? Okay.
The best professional development that connected to our needs immediately, and we saw a use for it, and that it wasn't repetitive, or it wasn't something that somebody else necessarily thought that we need, that we did not agree with, that it was connected to our own personal journey and development.
That's excellent.
Right?
Yeah. What about you?
Well, certainly we have the same comment that when the experience was relevant to something you were seeking, it was beneficial. But then I also added the concept of sometimes we don't always know what's good for us, so to speak. So when it's done in a cohort manner, so maybe there was somebody else who had a passion about whatever it is the learning was becoming, then that became contagious. So again, something that's done in a cohort, collaborative manner, or even if you weren't the one who was really seeking the knowledge, suddenly you might have had that epiphany because of the group. Mm-hmm. The group cares.
Yeah. Does anybody else have anything different to add? Something that you talked about that wasn't covered?
Yeah, I think our group spoke, but I was very much what I was seeing the same thing, that professional development is really based on a phenomenal sort of lesson that would be taking place in a classroom, that you then go to the more abstract ideas based on this common experience you have together, you deconstruct it, and talk about what worked, what didn't in an inventory phase. But very close to the classroom at the heart.
So connected to the work you're doing in the classroom, the needs of your students, so it's relevant, collaborative learning, and that cohort I like that. So it's somebody that you're pulling in and drawing in all the expertise from your peers. So like Mike said, in the beginning of this workshop, we want to just frame the context of how we gathered the information, what we were looking at, the feedback that we got. And this project went for 5 years. All right, so each cohort, we had 3, and it was a 2-year, each cohort was for 2 years. So one of the years kind of overlapped, the cohort 1 and 2. So as we went through this, first of all, I just want to give you a sense of the size and the scope. So we started, our area was all the way up to where Weed is and all the way down to San Bernardino. So it's 33 counties. Typically, the teams were 4 to 5 teachers initially is what we started out with in cohort 1 and 2. By cohort 3, we added the principal. That was one of our findings, that the principal's role is very important. So we'll talk about that a little later. So there was a total of 287 teachers. And we reached, by the end of the project, just about 20,000 students were somehow reached through this project. Mike, do you have anything to add? 1,000 teachers. So a lot of the teachers took back their learning and then taught at their own school. So that we really encouraged that, or we brought professional learning to their school so that it would reach far more than just their team.
Just a little bit more about Teachers Professional Learning, Inc. So what we were funded for was to run a competitive grant program that would fund teams of teachers at their schools trying to solve problems they identified. They had 2 years of funding, and it wasn't a lot of funding. The max was about $30,000 over 2 years, but it wasn't insignificant either. So these teams of teachers were able to do some things with the funding that they had. They could choose any area. It wasn't necessarily a content area. They would have to identify the problem, and you'll see through our system how that was done. We were tasked with putting together a system to make this work over those 33 counties. And so these were kind of the requirements, the non-negotiables, what we asked people to do. We asked them to team up, collaborate. We asked them to conduct an evidence-based needs assessment so they could identify their student needs and then translate those into teacher professional learning needs. We asked them to select professional learning experiences and then get some professional learning, design and implement interventions. And if anything has to be sequenced, that was one we would like to see, where the sequence is get the professional learning and then develop the intervention and then see how it works in your classroom. To try to capture the effectiveness of it, we introduced this action research model, and the whole thing was based on evidence, using evidence to move forward, using evidence to make those changes over that 2-year time period. So real quickly, we picked out one project we thought we'd highlight for you, okay? So the bullet points on the slide are things that we pulled out of our data, and we had tons of data. So we pulled these out of the data. So they're kind of general things that happened to teams along the way. They gained instructional knowledge, and they collaborated with their teammates, et cetera. But one of the things I want to share with this particular team was that in their final report, they said exactly what we wanted them to say, I guess. We started with the data. We noticed that our high school students were not meeting the writing proficiency we expected. We started with data. So Visions in Education is a charter school here in Sacramento. It's based in the San Juan district. And it has about 5,000 students and about 300 teachers. And it's an independent study charter school. Their project was a writing proficiency project. So just from their final report, I thought I'd pull out a couple of highlights and tell you what they thought they accomplished. So number one is they established a professional learning team, and then their professional learning team with the funding went to the Amherst Writers Workshop, and they sent 2 teams of people to the Amherst Writers Workshop over 2 years. Second, they developed an online publication of student writing called the Word Squad. When they showed up for the first culminating activity at Chico State, we kept wondering why they were all running around with this Word Squad t-shirt on. Third, they developed a course for high school students. So these independent high school students could sign up and come to a semester-long course they call Finding Your Voice. They run that course now 6 times a year. And at this point, at the end of the 2015 school year, they had over 360 students participate. Fourth, they partnered with 916 Inc., a Sacramento literacy organization, and again, at the end of the 2015 year, they had produced 12 books of student and teacher writing, and there's a couple of covers up there that you can take a look at. And then fifth, they developed an annual summer writing retreat for teachers. This is a week-long experience that they developed themselves, and they've been offering for the past 3 or 4 years. So they accomplished quite a bit with starting out with the data, and working their way through the project. So we've got a little video to run next.
I leave here with a new voice inside of me. A voice that isn't afraid to say what needs to be said. A voice that doesn't care that it might be offensive to some people. I leave here with confidence.
I kind of saw writing as an opportunity just to say what I like to say. My parents had no idea that I was getting bullied, and it was just huge for me because I was able to stand up there and just say, yes, this happened to me, and yes, this really sucked.
I think it kind of gave me a path, and at the end of the path there's a door. You open the door, but there's still obstacles to get into that door. The nervousness of, is people really gonna like this?
My creative outlets just weren't there. I was just so blocked up, and I was just so angry, and this class really it sort of cleaned my soul in a way.
We're doing creative work with them to instill confidence and to make them unafraid to put words on a piece of paper, and it actually has had a big impact on that.
I seen a total change in their writing. I seen a total change in them wanting to read more and wanted to, just be engaged, and just the improvements they made in their grades. Across the board, I've seen major improvements for them.
The class definitely helped me academically. Before, I would dread writing. It was the last thing on my to-do list. It was the thing I dreaded most. And now, I write every day.
Because they're either homeschooled or independent study students, generally day one, nobody knows each other. But something happens, and it's just this kind of magic thing that happens somewhere in the middle of the semester, and I look around the room and I realize that these kids are now all friends.
So it becomes like a sisterhood and brotherhood where no one's really afraid to say what they really feel like saying.
We're not just writing, we're also learning to listen, and we're learning to be considerate and kind.
I just like the creativity and the freedom to write whatever I want. Not even mold will grow.
We have teachers and parents tell us all the time, my students are much more willing to tackle their writing assignments, to tackle their essays. The kids that come out of our classes are absolutely unafraid and willing to tackle those things once they've learned that their voice matters, and that when they put words down on paper that they absolutely can do it.
I leave here knowing that these words that I have are worth sharing. I leave here with a newfound respect of words. I leave here with a new talent that I was afraid to share. I leave here with the treasure of words. I leave here knowing that everyone has a voice worth sharing. I leave here a changed person.
We had many stories like that, many stories where students had life-changing experiences because of decisions that their teachers made based on evidence and using their own classroom evidence to get the professional learning that they felt they needed. So we're kind of at the end of the intro part of this, and we can certainly answer more questions about Teachers PL Inc. if you have those questions. But we want to switch now to taking you through the Sil's system and doing a little bit of unpacking and giving you an opportunity to try some of the activities, some of the tools yourself.
Okay, so can you all reach in your packet and pull out the sheet that looks like this? Okay? So this is the SILS model, and I'm just going to begin with briefly telling you about this, and then we're going to unpack it as we go through the rest of the workshop. So what you see in the center is obviously an action research cycle, which I'm sure you've seen many times before. What makes this unique is that it's really targeted for application in the classroom. So this was developed over the 5 years. We were doing essentially an action research on action research. So every time we would go back and revise the model, and once we realized this was working, this wasn't working. And so this developed, it was an iterative process over time. So what you're seeing in the blue, it should, if you can't see that from up there, it's highlighted on your handout. Those are the tools that we developed to support the teachers over time. We knew that this was missing, and so today we're going to look at a few of those tools. On the left-hand side, kind of frames everything here. This is a tool, but it's an accountability tool. And so we call that because we went through a process for accountability being an ongoing process. So we developed some surveys, and we'll talk about how we actually could get feedback from them to their advisors. The second one is a culminating activity. So it's, again, based around action research. We develop a rubric to look at their final projects. So those really are ongoing, especially the bi-monthly reporting. So this is kind of captures, I think the model, trying to frame it into a couple points was hard. And I think by the end, we realized the importance of the 2 levels in this model. So that first level is what we're all familiar with. This is the learning about instruction, going to professional learning. What do we need to enhance our professional knowledge and pedagogy to help our students learn? But the second one now is what we developed over time and realizing the importance. It's how do you enact that? So what is the process? How do you make those decisions about what you think that you should go off and get for professional learning? How do you know that your students need this? What evidence are you using to drive those decisions? Over time, how do you collaborate with your teachers in your school? How do you assess what your students are learning and make some decisions about curriculum and what you're doing that are based on evidence? So that's the system. So this is not a professional learning that you would come to us and get. This is a system to put that professional learning and frame it and develop it over time.
Just to add to the last point here, the other thing about this is it's teacher-driven. So our task was teacher-driven. We were trying to figure out a model where there could be sufficient amount of teacher decision-making, and that's what SILS does. It does this last part. Teachers participate in interpreting the evidence and then making decisions.
So looking on your first tool set, you'll do a needs assessment on that, and it's in step 1 of the action research. So right up front, we realized soon after the very first cohort went through that we needed to find a way to target what students need and decisions that are being made, but it need to be made or driven by evidence. So Mike and I developed a needs assessment with your standard 3 phases, and that first phase is explore the present state. So it's that hunch. My students are not doing so well in X, Y, and Z. We've got to change it somehow. So that's really your gut instinct. It's from being in the classroom, knowing what your students need, looking at evidence that you've had, but it's still your hunch. And the second is to gather and analyze data. So we've had several workshops, 2 or 3 of them during the year, that talk about each of these steps, but we also introduce the idea of what kind of data can you use to establish a baseline. So everybody needs that baseline. And something other than standardized tests. It can be student portfolios. It can be a writing assignment. Things depends on the area that you are opting to work on. The third one is make a decision based on evidence. So you're going to go back to that evidence that you've collected, compare it to your hunch, and now you can move forward making a decision that's based on data that you've collected, and you have solid evidence to move forward. So we're going to practice a little bit of that today. So again, go to your folder. So I want you to select a concern at your school district, your site, related to NGSS. And you'll see on that first step on the needs assessment, take a few minutes. And I think it's best if just one person at the table come up with some kind of problem or a need at their school, and everybody else can help fill in that first. Let's see, we've got it right here. Yep. Does everybody have that one? It's the school context. So this is just a piece in the needs activity.
Okay, let's just wrap up here a little bit. So I saw at every table people trying to work through phase one of our needs assessment, and that really has a lot of questions about students and what conditions students present. So from a teacher perspective, teachers are trying to work on improving the students that are right in front of them, the current students that they deal with. The needs assessment has in step one the hunch. What's the problem? What's the most immediate problem we want to work on? Now, the nice thing would be to have a group of teachers collaborate together to kind of work through those problems together and identify problems that are most immediate to them that could be worked on and perhaps a change made for improvement. The second phase of the needs assessment asks that group of teachers to try to find the evidence that confirms their hunches. The evidence that confirms their hunches. So just like a scientist working, you'll catch it. Julie's a scientist and I'm a science ed person. So you'll catch how we landed on this. So the first thing is, oftentimes when you're working on a science problem, you've made an observation, you have a question, you wonder about something, you're making a hunch about how something works. Okay, well then you got to go out and you got to find some evidence that either confirms or refutes what your thinking is so that you can move to the next step. Well, it's almost the same way in a classroom with teachers working with those students. So your second step, find confirming evidence or refuting evidence, because that will help you identify which ways you want to go. That evidence then was used by our teams of teachers to determine what next thing they needed to learn in order to develop the best intervention. So that's the needs assessment part of our system. Okay, so another part of the needs assessment is, oftentimes when you're in a school, you need some resources in order to get professional learning and conduct the changes that you want to change. So when we participated in the final year of T-BAR on a state design team that was trying to pull together all the evidence that we had from across these projects on the state, we were introduced to the instructional capacity building framework, which was developed by Ann Jakewith at Stanford. So what Ann did was she had looked at school instructional resources and she put them in 4 categories. So the categories are up here. They're categories like instructional knowledge, tools and materials, relationships, and organizational structures. So if Julie would flip to the next slide, we asked our teams to sit down with their principal and look at their problem and then try to determine what resources they had in hand available to them. So it could be anything from an expert on your own staff to plenty of science equipment to do all the science stuff, but nobody's using it. It's stored away in closets. And then the second part of it was to look at what resources you still needed. And we built this 4-quadrant thing. This is an example from one of the teams, one of their early passes through. We had the sheet laminated so they could put the stickies on, and at some point we could take a picture of it and they'd have that picture then for the next time they pulled it out and used it. So at your tables, this is another activity we're going to run you through. Take that same problem that you were working on, pull out one of the placemat type grids. So as you're pulling that out, we're going to ask you to work through. You want to flip the slide again, please? Thanks. So you've got that out, obviously, and then let's go to the next slide. Look, a couple directions here. So you're working on that same problem you were talking about a few minutes ago. Pick one quadrant with your table mates and see if you can't work through that particular set of in-hand resources in that quadrant that you have available to you, and then those resources that you would potentially need to solve the problem. Well, so the question was, were teams of teachers given more directions on how to identify a specific need? I would say the answer is, and I'm going to do it this way, no and yes. It's no because teams were asked to they were given information about how to conduct a needs assessment at their site. They were asked to use the needs assessment and then write a proposal in order to secure the funding. So they identified the need, and they also speculated about what initial professional learning experiences would help them address the need. So oftentimes what happens is, I think if a group of teachers gets together, and this is what we saw, I think typically, was that they would look at a fairly specific need that was based on the students that they were dealing with. Like your second one, like where our students are not performing well in math, we really need to figure that out because we need to do that for this group of students. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to take a few minutes, work through the, pick a quadrant, see what resources you have in hand, see what resources you still need to solve the problem, and we'll be back.
These are there to just write on. Looking out, I'm talking to different tables. Just from my perspective, watching and how to use this tool, so I was saying that the third cohort we used, the principals were involved. In the beginning, the first two, they were not. And so this really was a way to open up the line of communication. So we're at a workshop where everybody's sitting there staring at, oh, okay, what are we going to put down? And it turns out that in some cases, the principal had no idea that this was the need. All right, so everybody's sitting at the table, putting all their stickies down there, and this is what we need. And the principal goes, well, we have that. So this was something that everybody was very surprised over, or not realizing that they actually needed this, or they already have it. So this to me looked like almost an icebreaker. It was a conversation that could begin and to kind of unravel the resources that everyone brought to the table, not just the teachers and not just the principal, but more of a collective way to move forward and realizing what we need and what we already have. That ability to move those stickies around, all right, to say, look, we started here, and now we are really getting a lot more of the needs addressed. So it was a way to drive the discussion for the meeting, look where we've been, look where we are, and look where we want to still go. So that was a really nice, again, a nice resource tool. All right, we're going to have to stop. Can I have one volunteer to share out something that they discovered that they had, and something that they needed? How about the back table? What did you have? What are some of the things on your...
So with the next generation science standards, we said that our problem is, or area of concern is, professional development for our teachers. And my school is a TK-8 school. So that was the area that we focused on. And some of the things in the instructional knowledge quadrant, some of the things that I do have is that we have 4 middle school teachers who have participated in the rollout, and they've gone through the training. So it's looking to see how we can use them as resources to do some professional development, TK-8. We also have the County Office of Education. I mean, we're right across the street from them, so we use them as support.
So those are your haves. You have those.
And then, in terms of need, is that professional development across the system.
Good. So that seemed to be in our group too, the professional learning. We need some of that. We're not quite sure what it looks like or where we're going with it, but we definitely need some professional learning. Anything else? Okay. So now we're going to go to the next tool. And this is our accountability tool. So along the side here where you see these, did you flip it? Oh, you got it. Okay. So one of the things that we noticed right after the first year was that the accountability piece, so we had a team leader and we had the groups of 4 or 5 with a team leader. So the team leader was doing all the report out. And everybody else was, and ended up, it felt like he or she was doing all the work. So what we realized that everybody needed to be accountable. So we developed a system, actually the first year, we did everything online, thinking, oh, we'll have a blog and everybody will, of course, write in and share their experience with everybody across the state. That was our biggest challenge. We have such a large area. That didn't work out so well. So the next thing is the time involved. We're all really busy. So how can you be accountable? How can you have input? We all had advisors. So developed this online survey. So this is in Google Docs. So put this together, and it's on our website. You can see it's on there. There'll be information at the end about our website. And bi-monthly, we would ask these targeted questions related to the cycle that they should be in the action research. So one of the requirements was to at least do 1 full cycle of the action research each year. So that next year 2 would be driven by what you found in year 1. So here's an example. I pulled out step 3. So if you're looking at that model, you'll see some of the targeted or the characteristics that happen in that stage. So we're in step 3, and this is the kind of questions that we asked, and that's related to the diagram, the SILS model. So in the end, do you have any questions or concerns? So in each region, we had an advisor. The county office worked with us. A lot of the county office folks were their advisors. They would get directly back to them. So it's important that you have feedback. If you're running into questions and problems, you don't usually want to post it on a blog online, but you're fine to post it when you have an advisor that's there and close by and knows your work and the problems that you're facing. So this worked out. It takes about 5 minutes to fill out, and the requirement was everybody on the team needed to fill it out. And so that really improved over time, the accountability. And at first, everybody rolled their eyes and said, oh, no, not one more thing to do. By the end, everybody said, I'm really glad you had us do that because it forced us to get together, even if it was just right before we knew this was due, and to have a conversation about what we were doing and to get it on paper. So it worked out good. So this is one way. The second one is culminating project. So at the end of year 2, they created posters based on their project. It was all designed around action research. We had a 2-day conference. Everybody came to Chico, spent the night in the dorms, and they presented a paper. So there's 2 parts. First it was a poster, and the second was an actual paper. We ran it just like a conference, 15-minute presentations with questions. And the next year when we did this, we actually gave them the choice to go out and to share their work in any venue that they wanted to. So some people did the county office. Some people did presentation to the whole school, parents. I mean, there's a variety of ways that people put together their work. But everybody still came back and said, we really missed that conference. So we couldn't do both. So there's a variety of ways, but the important thing is you need a culminating activity, some experience where you can share your knowledge and with your peers. And also you need some guidance as to what it is that we're looking for. So as time went by, we realized that we wanted to move away from teams telling a story to teams telling us what worked, what didn't work based on evidence. And that's how we actually evolved in our project so we have all the tools that help them get to that direction.
So just to summarize, when I was walking around, I heard a question about, well, how do you increase leadership among teachers? Well, you use programs like this where teachers are using evidence to make decisions. That's one way to increase leadership. So when we look back at all the qualitative data that we've collected over the past 5 years, these are a couple of the points that seem to pop out continuously. One, a system is in place that enables evidence-based decision making. So it's good to have evidence, it's good to have a voice, and putting those together, produces that evidence-based decision making that the teachers are involved in. Teachers told us that going through a project like this, where they were having to track and collect the evidence and analyze the evidence and do that action research along the way, and they're doing it collaboratively, it increased their confidence and their self-efficacy. The other thing was that we had numerous teachers who came to us and said, I'm recognized as the expert in my district now. We were taunted by some of the folks at CDE when this thing started that we wouldn't be funding a project in Alpine County, small county way up in the mountains. And we did fund a project in Alpine County. Somebody actually applied. And it was 3 teachers from a 2-room school. And they were thinking that they should learn something about technology because that was the way to go. And in the 2 years that they were in the project, they really became the district experts in technology, and they were recognized for that. But we found that across the board. We funded a project at a small charter school out in the country north of Chico, and the teachers had identified a serious problem, students getting to 4th and 5th grade and almost being non-readers. And they looked into this problem and went to professional development, took that evidence, became experts in identifying kids early, convinced the rest of the teachers and the administration at the school to use reading assessments in kindergarten and 1st grade so they could attack these problems. They had 4th and 5th graders who they identified in the first round that within 4 or 5 months were reading at grade level. And that's life-changing. So promotes recognition, stronger perceptions of agency. The connection I wanted to make here was that if you look at Fullen's work, where he had a book that he put out in 2014 called The Principal, and he talks about how important it is for principals to, he also had a book out that was titled Professional Capital, and you'll see that at the bottom here. He talks about how important it is for principals to work alongside teachers, and he at one point says that research shows that groups of teachers working together in a focused manner can make significant changes in student learning. The principal's role is to support the teachers and learn alongside of them. That's what a project like this was intended to do, and that's what our system does. It gives you a system to capture that kind of work, addressing student problems that exist right in front of those teachers. Okay, so on the right side of your packet, you'll find this last sheet. And this is a quick little ladder of feedback activity. And we're looking at this as an opportunity for you to raise some questions to clarify what you would still like to know about the collective instructional leadership system. And again, we would suggest that you work with the folks at your table, and then after a few minutes, we'll take some time and we'll see if there are any questions we can. We're just going to open it up. Ask questions that put us in a position of having to clarify this, okay? Yes, sir.
I do have one. I'm really excited about being here. We're developing our educator effectiveness plan. We've actually already taken it to the board, and we have this component built in, which is an innovative approach. It almost very similar to your model for action research, and then so we're funding these initiatives throughout our district. The question I had, though, is on the process of selection. Because my board asked, well, how are you going to determine? And I go, well, I actually want that to be somewhat of a messy job, because I want the teacher leaders and the site administrators to have that conversation of who gets to do this work. But I probably need to give them a little bit more than that. So any suggestions on how you did your selection of who got to, because obviously you had more people applying, how did you narrow down to who got funded?
Okay, that's a great question. And what we did was, we produced an application that had, in the initial form, had components of the needs assessment, and then they also the teams that were applying had to speculate as to what kind of professional learning they thought would fill their need, and they also had to produce a budget for how much they needed to fund this system, and they could spend a little bit on equipment, but most of it had to be professional learning or release time. So. If you
in general, I'd use the expression of the cream, it was pretty apparent which ones were more thought out than others.
Okay, both times, both rounds where we ran the competitive thing, we got about 50 applications, and we knew we could only fund about 25. So we gathered up a group of teachers that we knew and some of our university colleagues, and we had them all blind read all these applications, and we came up with a little rating system. And then basically we made the first cut based on ratings, and then Julie and I went back through all of them to see if that was a fair way to do it. But if you're interested in the application, we can probably find one and ship it out to you.
Being that we are not part of this project, but if we took this idea and this format back to our school sites, how would this be implemented without that carrot or that luxury of having any money to fund it?
Yeah, well, I have two things I would say to that. One, your colleague across the table wisely, when you asked the question initially, your colleague wisely pulled out the resource sheet and said we could look at what we have. Okay, so I can give you an example. There's a district up in Tehama County that had put in a proposal, got funded, obviously. And, again, this was another team that did a wonderful job. Had a virtually new teacher take over as the team leader, and she was just sparkled as a leader. But the superintendent liked the work that the team had done so much that he, in the subsequent year, allocated a portion of professional development funds to a competitive grant process, and then allowed teachers from the district to team up and apply for grants. So it's funding from another source, but carving it out and recognizing that some of the things that teachers felt they should be working on were important to fund. We all realize that there are district needs to get information out, there are school needs to deal with the same piece of information and to have professional learning events around those things. But there's also things that teachers work on, again, based on what they're facing in their classrooms, that they feel compelled to work on, if they can get funding for it.
I think that, in thinking about that, that is a real, how do you just get started? So with all the funding coming out for professional learning, I think that we are going to have this pot somewhere. So how to make that pot extend and keep going. So if you have that seed money, which we're supposed to get, you can allocate that for professional development. But along with that, if you have a system similar or like this, that actually is evidence-based, that you can show the data to someone else. A lot of our teams have now used this to argue for more grants. Teachers, lots of them are writing grants now. And it's like, this is what we've done, this is the data we collected, this is the effectiveness of what we're doing. And so that has opened the door for a lot of resources that they had never even thought of before. So I think that having a system in place, coupled with the funds that are coming out for professional learning, might be that door opener. It's not going to sustain it unless you do the work and keep evaluating and going through. But I think it's perfect timing right now. It seems like that you do need that initial carrot.
Any other questions or? Okay, thank you so much for coming.